Outside the hospital entrance, John Sullivan stumbled forward, clutching the $500,000 he'd gotten for selling his kidney. Despite his deathly pale face, a deeply satisfied smile spread across his lips. 500,000. It would be enough to cure Sarah. Trading one of his kidneys for Sarah's life. It was worth it. Fighting through the post-op weakness, he half ran, half stumbled down the hall to her room. Seeing the frail woman lying in the hospital bed, the ache in John's heart deepened. Sarah, your broke boyfriend isn't even here. Who are you putting on this show for? Oh, shut up. I'm just honing my acting skills. How else am I supposed to keep fooling him? The familiar, teasing voice drifted from the room, freezing John's hand just as he was about to push the door open. Fooling him? A gasp echoed from inside the room. Sarah, you're incredible. Faking some medical records, and you had the guy wrapped around your finger. He really bought that you had cancer. I heard he gave you his entire life savings. Guess how much? $60,000. Seriously? 60 grand? Sarah drops more than 100 grand on a single bottle of champagne at the club. That's nothing. How embarrassing for him to even offer it. Each word struck John like a physical blow, leaving his hands and feet numb with shock. Sarah Johnson, faking cancer? Inside the room, the supposedly weak Sarah threw back the covers and hopped out of bed. Someone quickly pulled up a chair for her. The face he remembered, always graced with a sweet smile, now seemed utterly alien. All right. He was broke anyway. I'm actually surprised he managed to scrape together 60,000, Sarah said. More mocking laughter filled the room. Ooh, don't tell me you actually feel sorry for him, Sarah. Ethan would throw a fit if he found out. Don't be ridiculous. The most I feel is pity. I only pretended to be poor and dated that loser to help Ethan get back at him. Ethan's the one I really love. I slummed it for 2 years for him. Yeah, the guy should be thanking Ethan. Without him, scum like that would never even get close to someone like Sarah, right? Huh. Outside the door, John couldn't stop shaking, his thoughts a tangled mess. Sarah toyed with her long, pale fingers. I was just surprised it was so easy to get him to cough up everything he had. If I'd known, I would have faked being sick sooner. A cold smile touched her lips. Ethan should be happy now. Those 2 callous sentences shattered the last remnants of hope in John's heart. The color drained completely from his already pale face, leaving him looking like he might collapse at any moment. A passing nurse noticed his state. Sir, are you all right? Do you need any help? John snapped back to reality, seeing movement inside the room. Realizing someone was about to come out, he quickly thanked the nurse and dragged himself into the nearest restroom. The mirror reflected a face as white as paper. Their cruel words echoed relentlessly in his mind. He'd never imagined it. Sarah Johnson, the girl he thought was just another struggling student like him, was actually the heiress to the Johnson family fortune. Their entire relationship, a lie. Sweet memories clashed violently with the harsh present. He remembered how he and Sarah had met. It started by chance. 2 years ago, he was working nights part-time at a barbecue joint. A drunk customer started getting handsy with Sarah. She appealed to the owner, but he just looked away. As the drunk got bolder, John couldn't watch anymore. He grabbed the nearest bottle and smashed it over the guy's head. That just enraged the customer, who called his buddies to jump John. Just then, a small figure stepped in front of him, holding up a phone dialing 911. In that instant, seeing her standing protectively before him, John's heart skipped a beat. It might sound cliché, but for John, who'd grown up an orphan at Hope Orphanage, that act of defense meant the world. Especially since she, a young woman, had bravely faced down a group of big guys for him. Later, he learned that Sarah, like him, had also grown up at Hope Orphanage. She also had to work 3 jobs just to get by, having dropped out after high school because she couldn't afford college tuition. Bonding over their shared background, they naturally grew closer and started dating. To save money for a place of their own someday, he gave up his dorm room, and they moved into a cramped studio apartment in the suburbs. Life was tough, exhausting even, but John never complained. He believed their future together was bright. But then a month ago, Sarah told him she had cancer and needed a lot of money for treatment. After 2 years together, John considered Sarah the only family he had in the world. He couldn't bear the thought of losing her. Desperate to save her, John gave her every penny he'd saved working constantly through 4 years of college, $60,000. But Sarah told him a treatment would cost $500,000. Seeing Sarah looking so weak and frail in the hospital bed, feeling utterly cornered, John fought down his fear and went to the black market. He sold one of his kidneys for the $500,000 she needed. He thought that money would cure her, that their life could go back to being full of hope. He never imagined it was all a lie. Sarah's background was fake. The cancer was fake. He couldn't help but wonder, was even their meeting 2 years ago staged? Tears streamed down his face without him realizing. The heavy bundle of cash in his backpack felt like it was mocking his stupidity. He'd given up a kidney for a liar. And the Ethan they'd mentioned. The only person John could think of was Ethan Williams, a student a year below him. Sophomore year, there had been a speech competition with a $5,000 prize. John needed the money desperately for tuition, so he poured everything into preparing and won first place. He remembered Ethan Williams had come in second. When they were getting their awards, Ethan had leaned in and whispered, "Nobody steals my spotlight." John had dismissed it as competitive trash talk from a younger guy. He never dreamed it would lead to such a devastating cost. John roughly wiped the tears from his face, pulled out his phone, and dialed William Brown's number. 2 weeks earlier, Professor Brown had told him about a prestigious study abroad opportunity and wanted to recommend him for it. But back then, John's only focus was getting money for Sarah's treatment, so he turned it down without a second thought. Now that he knew the truth, there was no reason to sacrifice his future for Sarah anymore. He was done playing this sick game of cat and mouse with the rich kids. "Professor Brown," John said into the phone, his voice steady despite everything, "I want to take that study abroad opportunity." William Brown was ecstatic on the other end of the line. "John, you finally came around. Don't worry, I understand your difficulties. I'll apply for a grant from the college to help with your tuition, and I'll also try to find a way to help with your girlfriend's medical expenses. We could even start a fundraiser at school." "It's okay, William," John Sullivan softly interrupted William's well-intentioned offer. "I can pay the tuition myself. Leave the grant for someone who needs it more. As for the medical expenses, those aren't needed either." William, assuming John had found a source of funding, was genuinely happy for him. "That's great. Now you can focus on your studies abroad. You have half a month before you have to report. Use this time to take care of things here." "Thank you, William." John didn't offer any further explanation. After hanging up, he clutched the backpack in his arms tighter. Without further delay, he turned and left the hospital, deposited all the money from his backpack into his card, paid his tuition, and bought a plane ticket leaving for his studies abroad in 2 weeks. Of the $50,000 he had, only $2,000 remained. John pressed his still aching abdomen, looked at the balance on his card, and gave a wry smile. He felt a strange sense of relief. Relief that he'd overheard the truth before giving the $50,000 to Sarah. Back at Sarah's hospital room door, Sarah was alone in her bed. John hesitated, then pushed the handle down. Sarah had already dropped her mocking demeanor and was back to playing the part of his sweet, caring girlfriend. "John, why are you so late today?" John's fingers curled, and he lowered his gaze. There was something at school. Sarah didn't suspect anything. She took his hand, unable to contain her excitement. "I have good news to tell you." John paused and asked, "What good news?" "The doctor just told me my cancer diagnosis was a mistake. I'm not sick," as he suspected. John closed his eyes, recalling the screen of her phone he'd glimpsed earlier, bright with messages. Someone named Ethan had written in a group chat, "Sarah, hurry up and tell that broke loser your cancer diagnosis was a mistake. I want to see his reaction when he realizes all his money went down the drain. It'll be priceless." The others in the chat had chimed in, egging him on, calling it a brilliant idea. Someone even suggested a bet on whether John would take his anger out on Sarah. The last message was Sarah's reply. "As you wish, my dear." For the past 2 years, Sarah had been incredibly accommodating. He thought he'd found the perfect girlfriend. It turned out her compliance was all based on Ethan's commands. He was nothing but a toy in their eyes. John smiled, his voice sincere. "I'm so glad you're okay." His calm reaction surprised Sarah. She hesitated, then said in a self-reproachful tone, "It's all my fault for not getting a second opinion sooner. You wouldn't have wasted all your hard-earned savings." John shook his head. "Anything for you is worth it." He considered the money the price of buying out his 2 years with Sarah. $6,000 for 2 years with the Johnson family heiress. It was a bargain for a penniless student like him. His words hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. As the Johnson heiress, she'd been surrounded by flattery and fake concern her entire life. She was immune to empty words. But John was different. He didn't know her real identity. Every word he said was genuine. He was even willing to spend his entire life savings on her. Even when that money was wasted, he had no complaints. Complex emotions swirled in Sarah's eyes. She threw her arms around John's waist. "John, thank you." John lowered his eyes, hiding the mockery within. Back in his small studio apartment, Sarah sighed, lying on the cramped bed. "My bed at home is so much more comfortable." John spoke softly. "You've been through a lot. You've been through a lot pretending to live in this tiny apartment with me when you're used to a mansion and a king-size bed. But don't worry, soon we'll both be free." Sarah Johnson assumed he was simply lamenting his recent hospital stay. She rose, wrapped her arms around his waist, and buried her head in his neck. John, meeting you was the luckiest day of my life. Despite working 18-hour days, John Sullivan didn't carry any unpleasant odors. Instead, a fresh, clean laundry scent clung to him, which Sarah found particularly appealing. Her breath hitched, and her arms tightened around his waist. The incision from his surgery that morning was abruptly constricted. John's face paled, and he gasped. Sarah instantly released him, her eyes filled with concern. "What's wrong? You look terrible." John forced a smile. "Nothing, just a stomachache." Sarah placed her warm hand on his abdomen, the other still resting lightly on his waist. "Let me rub it for you." John closed his eyes, offering no resistance. But this small warmth could never thaw the ice that had settled around his heart. Meeting Sarah Johnson was the unluckiest day of his life. The next morning, John rose early. The rustling sounds stirred Sarah from her sleep. She opened her eyes to see John stuffing clothes from the closet into a suitcase. She bolted upright, a flicker of panic in her eyes. "What are you doing? Where are you going?" "I'm going to visit Mom at the Hope Orphanage," John replied, without looking up, "and donate these old clothes." He knew that after he left the country in 2 weeks, Sarah wouldn't bother taking these cheap clothes with her. She was, after all, the pampered heiress of the Johnson family. Everything in this tiny studio apartment probably cost less than a single pair of her shoes. Better to give the clothes to the children at the orphanage than let them go to waste. Sarah breathed a sigh of relief. She knew John held a deep affection for the Hope Orphanage and often took things there. "I'll go with you." Since they'd been together, Sarah had frequently accompanied John on his visits. But today, he didn't want her to come. This was his last visit to see Mom and the children before he left the country, and he wanted to say goodbye properly. Before he could refuse, Sarah's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID, clutched the phone tightly, and said nervously, "My boss needs me. I need to take this." She scrambled out of bed and hurried into the bathroom, shutting the door. But in a 100-square-foot apartment, privacy was a luxury. John heard every word of the deep male voice on the other end of the line. "Sarah, come shopping with me. I'm in a foul mood, and you need to be here." Sarah agreed without hesitation. When she emerged from the bathroom, she wore a familiar, apologetic expression. "John, I'm so sorry. I've been out sick from work for so long. My boss wants me back in the office today. I can't go with you." John didn't challenge her lie. He simply nodded. "Okay, go ahead." As Sarah hurriedly dressed and left, John watched her go, remembering the countless times over the past 2 years she had rushed off in the middle of the night or during their rare dates, always with the excuse that her boss needed her. He used to feel sorry for her, urging her to find a different job. But she would just hug him from behind, her face pressed against his back, and say, "I don't mind the hard work. I just don't want to be broke when I marry you. I want you to have a good life." Her sweet words always touched him deeply. After that, he even picked up extra errands at school, determined to earn as much as possible. Sarah was working so hard for their future, and he couldn't let her down. Now, he realized what a fool he'd been. He'd promised the children at the orphanage he'd bring them snacks. After packing, he headed to the mall. He didn't have much money left, but it was enough to bring smiles to their faces. He bought 2 large bags of snacks and struggled to carry them toward the subway. As he passed a car dealership, a familiar voice caught his attention. "Just buy them all. Looking at them individually is such a hassle." John followed the sound and saw Sarah, a look of exasperated affection on her face as she gazed at the man beside her. Despite her complaints, she obediently held his arm. Although his memory of 2 years ago was hazy, it wasn't hard to guess that this man, exuding an aura of wealth from head to toe, was Ethan Williams. It seemed that every time Sarah claimed her boss needed her, she was actually with this young man. Ethan scowled. "You're happy to spend all your time with that lowlife, but you can't even look at cars with me?" Sarah wrapped her arms around his waist, her eyes full of adoration. "Of course I can. I was just trying to save you the trouble. Buy them all, and then we'll go look at watches. I'll spend the whole day with you." She waved her hand dismissively, instructing the salesperson to deliver all 3 identical cars, each a different color, to the Villa district south of the city. The salesperson clearly recognized them and expertly took Sarah's black card. "Ms. Johnson, your total today is $30 million. Please come again." $30 million. The number nearly made John stumble. In their 2 years together, the gifts he'd received were mostly cheap t-shirts and keychains. The most expensive gift Sarah had ever given him was a watch that cost a little over $100. He'd been so reluctant to wear it. He'd kept it safely tucked away in a box. And now, $30 million was nothing more than pocket change for Sarah Johnson, a casual way to appease her childhood sweetheart. This was the real Sarah Johnson, the one who spent money like water. Unable to bear witnessing the sickeningly sweet display between the heiress and the young master, John turned to leave. The bags in his hands, overloaded, ripped open, scattering snacks across the ground. A sudden noise caught Sarah's attention. Their eyes met, and John saw her pupils constrict. Panic, helplessness. It all flickered across her face. John, weren't you going to Hope Orphanage? John Sullivan pointed to the snacks scattered on the ground. I was just getting the kids some treats. Sarah Johnson instinctively tried to hide the black card. I'm here with my boss's son. My boss had work today, so he asked me to take his son car shopping. This card isn't mine. The more she explained, the more flustered she seemed. Her last sentence had a distinct air of trying to cover something up. John Sullivan's gaze drifted to the 3 sports cars parked nearby. He didn't recognize the makes, but the fact that just 3 cars cost $30 million was an unimaginable sum to him. Your boss is quite wealthy. Afraid to say anything more, Sarah Johnson didn't respond and moved to pick up the scattered snacks. But Ethan Williams stepped forward with a smirk and grabbed her wrist, stopping her. John, even though she's your girlfriend, she can't help you right now. She's with me today. We're going shopping. It's her job. Sarah Johnson hesitated, looking at John. John, it's my boss's arrangement that... I understand, John Sullivan interrupted. I can manage. You go ahead. He couldn't compete with the charade the rich kids were putting on. He just wanted them to leave. He squatted down and started gathering the snacks himself. Sarah Johnson's fingers twitched, but she let Ethan Williams pull her away. At Hope Orphanage, each child clutched their treats with delight, chattering excitedly around John Sullivan. Looking at their genuine smiles brought a long-absent warmth to his heart. The director, seeing him alone, asked curiously, "Where's Sarah? Why didn't she come with you?" John Sullivan pressed his lips together, unsure how to answer. Seeing his expression, the director assumed they'd had a fight and patted his shoulder. John, I watched you grow up. I know how much you've always wanted a family of your own. Sarah works 3 jobs to save money for a future with you. She stands up for you when you're in trouble. And she's always so wonderful with the children here. Good women like her are rare these days. Don't let a little disagreement get in the way. Sit down and talk things through. Bitterness filled John's heart. He hadn't told the director about Sarah's cancer. The director didn't know he'd sold a kidney to save her, only to discover it was all a lie. After 2 years together, he knew how good Sarah was to him. But hadn't he given just as much, if not more? He'd laid his heart bare before her. That's why the truth had shattered him, leaving him bleeding and broken. When he got back to his small studio apartment, Sarah had dinner waiting. John, I had to go with my boss's son. It was my job. I'm sorry I left you there alone. When I make more money, I'll never leave you again, she said apologetically. John had heard these lies countless times. He simply mumbled, okay, and sat down to eat. Perhaps still shaken from nearly being exposed, the meal passed in silence. As he put down his chopsticks, Sarah produced a box with an air of mystery. John, you worked so hard taking care of me at the hospital. My boss's son was in a good mood today and gave me a bonus. I bought you a present. Open it. Looking at the anticipation in her eyes, John took the box. Inside was a tie. He didn't recognize the logo on the box. But John rubbed the sticky residue on the bottom of the box, a cynical twist to his lips. She'd probably just peeled off the price sticker. He may not know luxury brands, but he knew that only boxes for free gifts had stickers. He got the freebie, while Ethan Williams got $30 million worth of cars. Perhaps, in Sarah's mind, an orphan from Hope Orphanage only deserved free things. Seeing John's impassive face, Sarah was surprised. He usually treasured her gifts. What's wrong? Don't you like the color? I don't know anything about ties. The saleswoman helped me pick it out. John set the box aside and shook his head. You don't need to spend money on me. They were going to break up soon anyway. He didn't want any more financial entanglements with her. Sarah breathed a sigh of relief. So he was just being considerate. Her familiar, affectionate smile returned. It's only natural for me to spend money on my boyfriend. Besides, you spent all your savings on me, so it's only fair. John gave a tight-lipped smile and said nothing. Exhausted from the days back and forth between the orphanage and his apartment, he went to bed early. The next morning, John was jolted awake by a phone call. He answered groggily. William Brown's anxious voice filled his ear. Your thesis has been reported for fabricated data. The school is launching an investigation. John Sullivan jolted awake. Data fabrication was a serious offense, a career-ending catastrophe in the scientific community. If accused, he wouldn't just miss graduation, his chances of studying abroad would evaporate too. but he couldn't understand it. He'd spent grueling all-nighters for a month compiling the data for his thesis. How could it be flagged as fraudulent? And who would even report him? William, I collected the data myself. I would never plagiarize. William Brown sighed heavily. It's not enough that I believe you. You need proof. But graduation is less than 2 weeks away. Even if I submit a timeline of my experiments, it won't be processed in time for the certification review. The only option is to talk to whoever reported you and ask them to retract the accusation. Who reported me? John Sullivan asked quickly. Ethan Williams. The name hit John Sullivan like a punch to the gut. Why was this guy relentlessly targeting him? Wasn't it enough that Sarah Johnson had toyed with his feelings? Did Ethan need to tarnish his academic career as well? The space beside him in bed was cold. Sarah Johnson was gone. He didn't have Ethan's contact information and had no idea where to find him. His only option was to search online for the Williams family enterprise address and rush over, hoping to catch Ethan. He waited from 9 in the morning until 1 in the afternoon, standing for 4 hours straight without even a sip of water. His body, still recovering from kidney removal surgery, couldn't handle the prolonged standing and hunger. Just as he thought he would collapse, 2 familiar figures emerged from the building. It was Ethan Williams and Sarah Johnson. John Sullivan gritted his teeth, clutched his side, and intercepted them. Sarah Johnson looked flustered to see him there. John, what are you doing here? John's mind was focused solely on getting Ethan to retract the report. Mr. Williams, I collected all my data myself, working late nights in the lab. It's not fabricated. Please withdraw the accusation. Sarah seemed unaware of the situation. How could? Ethan cut her off with a cold smile. John, what if I do suspect you? Whether it's true or not, the school's investigation will reveal the truth. The school's investigation would take at least 2 weeks. He didn't have that kind of time. Mr. Williams, John pleaded, what will it take for you to retract the report? He knew Ethan was doing this on purpose, so there was no point beating around the bush. Ethan toyed with his car keys, not even glancing at John. You interrupted my car shopping yesterday. Tell you what, stand here and apologize loudly until I forgive you, and then I'll withdraw the report. How does that sound? Sarah frowned almost imperceptibly, her hands twitching at her sides, but she remained silent. John Sullivan took a deep breath and suppressed the surge of emotions. In front of the bustling company entrance, he forced out the words, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Curious stares from every direction converged on him. He'd never felt so humiliated, as though he'd been stripped naked and left on the street for everyone to mock. But he had no choice. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Ethan chuckled. Why are you mumbling? John Sullivan closed his eyes, fighting the stabbing pain in his abdomen, and repeated the words louder, his voice robotic. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Under the weight of the crowd's derision and Ethan's mocking gaze, John lost count of how many times he apologized. But Ethan remained silent. The pain in John's abdomen intensified until he could no longer stand. He collapsed. In the second before he lost consciousness, he saw Sarah Johnson rushing toward him, her face etched with panic. When Sarah Johnson saw him awake, she quickly took his hand with a worried look. John, you scared me so badly. John Sullivan quietly pulled his hand away, feeling nothing. After 2 years together, he couldn't believe Sarah didn't understand him. The moment she stood by silently, while Ethan Williams deliberately made things difficult for him, John knew the woman who would once have defended him was gone. The last shred of affection he held for her vanished. Why did you faint all of a sudden? Just then, the doctor entered with a grave expression, holding a report. John Sullivan, the tests show that you... Doctor, I understand my condition. You don't need to say anything more. John interrupted quickly. The doctor looked at the two of them, sighed, and left. A sudden panic rose in Sarah. What's wrong with you? Are you sick? Her voice trembled, though she didn't realize it. John Sullivan gave a weak smile. It's nothing. Just low blood sugar. An old problem. Sarah knew about his low blood sugar and relaxed a little. Looking at the pale man in the bed, she said haltingly, John, I'm sorry I didn't speak up for you today. You know he's my boss's son. If I upset him, I'll lose my job. As she spoke, her eyes darted away, unable to meet his emotionless gaze. Regardless of whether she knew about the false accusation or not, the fact remained that she had sided with Ethan. He pressed a hand to the stabbing pain in his chest and pulled the covers over his head. Understand. You should go back. Don't be late for work. Seeing him so weak yet still concerned for her, a pang of guilt struck Sarah. She stared at him for a long moment, then placed a warm hand on top of the covers. John, I'll never let you be wronged again. What a touching promise. Too bad it was a lie. After the fabrication incident was resolved, His diploma was issued, and his plans to study abroad proceeded smoothly. Despite the doctor's advice to stay a few more days, he insisted on leaving the hospital. Back in his apartment, everything was exactly as he had left it. Sarah hadn't been home in days. A news alert popped up on his phone. John instinctively clicked on it. Breaking. Johnson family and Williams family join forces. Engagement ceremony in 7 days. He caught his breath. So, Sarah had been busy with her engagement. He opened the travel app and looked at his flight information. He had 6 days left before he left. John sighed and began to gather all the items they had bought as a couple. The matching toothbrushes, towels, keychains. He and Sarah wouldn't need them anymore. After packing everything into a box, he headed downstairs to throw it away. He ran into Sarah just outside the door. She looked at the box filled with things they had carefully chosen together, her voice trembling slightly. Why are you throwing them away? I don't need anything now. I'll buy new things later. She would naturally get new furniture after marrying Ethan Williams. After he carried the box upstairs and tossed it aside, he heard Sarah Johnson's hushed voice from inside. Don't worry, Ethan. I'll make sure he comes to our engagement party. A cold snort came from the other end of the line. I want to see his face when a woman he dated for 2 years becomes my fiancée. Doesn't he like to show off? I'll give him a chance to really show off. John's hands clenched involuntarily at his sides, only loosening after a long moment. He forced a stiff smile. It seemed their plan would fail this time. Sure enough, when he pushed open the door again, Sarah handed him an invitation. John, there's an event in 7 days. Come with me. You must come. John stared at her for a long time before taking the invitation. Okay, he said softly. Even if he couldn't go, he would send them an engagement gift. Over the next few days, Sarah used work as an excuse and didn't return to the apartment. John used this time to pack his bags. On the second to last day before his departure, the school held a graduation party. Although John had moved out of the dormitory earlier, he had good relationships with his roommates and classmates. Since he wouldn't be back for at least 2 years once he went abroad, he wanted to use the graduation party to say goodbye. Unexpectedly, he saw Ethan and Sarah at the party. Ethan had his arm around Sarah, a harmless smile on his face. John, I knew you were graduating today, so I specifically gave your girlfriend the day off and brought her to school to congratulate you. John knew that beneath this seemingly kind and pleasant facade lay the deepest malice towards him. He took a small step back, intentionally keeping his distance from Ethan. Ethan, however, seemed oblivious and moved closer. John didn't notice the champagne tower on the table behind him. Ethan's eyes flickered, and he suddenly cried out and lunged toward John. John instinctively dodged backward, knocking over the champagne tower. Instantly, the cascading glasses and champagne rained down on them. Without a second thought, Sarah yanked Ethan back, shielding him completely with her body. John fell hard to the ground, countless glass shards piercing his skin. Blood mixed with champagne flowed across the floor, soaking him through. The still healing knife wound on his abdomen. Stung by the alcohol, began to bleed again. John's face grew increasingly pale. He watched as Sarah carefully checked Ethan for injuries. In a daze, he seemed to see that figure from 2 years ago again. He stretched out a trembling, blood-soaked hand, trying to grasp at this single source of warmth, but he could no longer hold on. His arm fell heavily to the floor. Opening his eyes, John Sullivan found himself wrapped in bandages. The doctor, seeing him awake, looked at him with a flicker of pity. There were so many glass shards embedded in you. It took us 5 hours of surgery to get them all out. The wounds on your body are relatively minor and will heal in time. However, there's a deep gash on your face. The flesh was badly torn when you were brought in. Simple stitches will leave a scar. You'll need reconstructive surgery. The surgery will cost $10,000. You'll need to take care of the payment. Of the initial $2,000, less than $1,000 remained, nowhere near enough. John struggled to speak. Doctor, the reconstructive surgery. I won't be having it. The doctor frowned. You need to think this through. That scar will be on your face. Who wouldn't care about their appearance? But he simply couldn't afford it. John nodded silently. Then you could be discharged. Just be careful not to get your wounds wet. John's phone dinged. It was a message from Sarah Johnson. John, the boss's son is hurt. I need to stay with him at the hospital. You go on home. It seems she hadn't even noticed he'd also been injured in the same accident. It made sense. At the time, Sarah had been completely focused on Ethan Williams in her arms, with no attention to spare for him. He painfully climbed out of bed and, fighting the throbbing pain, went to handle his discharge. Reaching the stairwell, he heard Ethan Williams yelling, clutching his cheek. I can't be disfigured. My face can't have a scar. Not even a small one. We're getting engaged tomorrow. Sarah soothed him patiently. Ethan, don't worry. I won't let your face scar. I'll get you the best medicine, the best doctor. A nearby doctor spoke up. We have a very effective scar cream, but it's quite expensive. One tube costs $8,000. Sarah immediately pulled out a black card. Ethan's face is what matters most. This money is nothing. Buy 10 tubes. We can't let Ethan's face have a single mark. Ethan finally stopped crying, pulling Sarah into a hug. Sarah, it's so great having you by my side. As Ethan released his grip, John finally saw the disfiguring wound on his face. It was a mere scratch, barely a trickle of blood, almost invisible unless you looked closely. For such a minor injury, Sarah had, without hesitation, spent $80,000 on scar cream. John unconsciously touched his own bandaged cheek. Even through the gauze, he could feel the crisscrossing stitches, imagining how gruesome the wound must look. $80,000. More than the $6,000 he'd saved over 4 years, and the $10,000 he needed for his own surgery combined. People truly lived in different worlds. Discharged, he returned to his suburban studio apartment. He had less than 4 hours until his 3 p.m. flight. He'd packed most of his belongings over the past few days. Tomorrow was Sarah and Ethan's engagement party. He should get them a gift. He considered Sarah's past gifts to him. A free tie, $3. 99 earbuds for their 100-day anniversary, $9. 99 t-shirt from a street vendor for her 21st birthday, $10. 99 silver-plated ring for their 1-year anniversary. And the most expensive gift, a watch worth just over $100 for their 2-year anniversary. Over 2 years, her gifts, big and small, filled an entire box, heavy with their weight. But their combined value probably didn't exceed $300. In her eyes, he was just a plaything, only worthy of cheap trinkets. Finally, he wrote a message on the back of the invitation, wishing you happiness. Goodbye. He placed the invitation on top of everything in the box and arranged for same-day delivery, instructing the courier to deliver it to the address on the invitation by noon tomorrow. His phone alerted him that he had 3 hours until boarding. John pulled his suitcase, took one last look at the studio apartment that had been his cage, and headed to the airport without looking back. As the plane soared into the sky, he left everything in the city behind. From now on, everyone's lives would return to normal. Sarah would continue to be the privileged Johnson heiress, and he would pursue his studies abroad. There would be no further interaction between them. Sarah Johnson sat rigidly in the chair, allowing the stylist to work their magic on her face. For some reason, she wasn't as excited as she thought she would be. Marrying Ethan Williams had once been her greatest dream. He had always seen her as a kind of older sister figure until 2 years ago, when he'd shown up at her door, red-eyed and claiming he'd been wronged. In a moment of impulsive sympathy, she'd offered to confront his supposed bully. Ethan, however, had a different plan. He wanted the offender to experience the feeling of falling from grace. Confused, Sarah listened as Ethan detailed his elaborate scheme of feigned affection and calculated redemption. Her immediate reaction was to refuse. She loved Ethan. How could she possibly pretend to be someone else's girlfriend? But he wore her down with relentless pleas and the promise of an engagement once his plan reached fruition. Against her better judgment, she agreed. For 2 years, she believed her motivation was to endure until Ethan was satisfied, get engaged, and then dramatically dump John Sullivan, shattering his illusions. Now, just 2 hours before the ceremony, with her dream about to come true, her thoughts were consumed by John. She pictured them snuggled together in his tiny bed. She remembered him sweating over a hot stove, cooking for her on a sweltering day, his eyes sparkling when he received a gift, the pained look on his face when she'd hurt herself. Every memory of John surfaced, each one a fresh stab of guilt. The ticking clock on the wall sounded like a time bomb in Sarah's ears. She had to admit she was terrified. Terrified of John showing up at the hotel and seeing her as the bride-to-be. Terrified of him discovering the 2-year-long deception. John had poured his heart and soul into their relationship. He'd willingly spent his hard-earned savings on her, never complaining, even when it seemed like a waste, relieved only that she hadn't actually developed cancer as she'd initially led him to believe. She couldn't bear to imagine his pain, his devastation, once he knew the truth. Her mind was a tangled mess. She didn't know what to do. Before she could sort through the chaos, a gaggle of her friends burst into the room, showering her with congratulations. Sarah, you finally escaped. It's about time. Congrats on ditching the dumpster-diving dude and snagging yourself a younger man. You've been through so much these past 2 years. You're finally free. These kinds of disparaging remarks had become commonplace over the past 2 years. At every gathering, her fabricated story of poverty and her relationship with John became the main topic of conversation. Everyone mocked him for being poor, cheap, only fit to wear clothes from the bargain bin. But today, the usual taunts felt like sharp needles. Oblivious to her darkening expression, her friends continued their chatter, their voices escalating in excitement. That guy's going to be crushed when he gets dumped. Imagine if I swooped in and pretended to be poor, just to comfort him. Tired of steak, are we? Ready for a little plain rice porridge for a change. Say what you will, that guy's got the looks and the body. I wouldn't mind playing poor for a night with him, if he... Sarah's foot shot out, connecting hard with the most boisterous of the group, sending her sprawling to the floor, coughing and clutching her chest. Sarah's face was an icy mask, her eyes dark and menacing. Who gave you permission to even think about him? The others couldn't understand. Sarah Johnson had never gotten angry before when they mocked John Sullivan. Get out. Don't you dare lay a finger on him. The commotion reached Ethan Williams, who was getting ready in the next room. He came to the doorway, only to see the people who usually surrounded Sarah slinking out. He put his arm around her waist to comfort her. Sarah, it's our engagement party. Why bother with him? Sarah looked at Ethan. He wore a black suit, a sprig of lily of the valley, her favorite, pinned to his lapel. It was a scene she dreamt of countless times. Yet, his focus was elsewhere. Ethan, why did you make me John's girlfriend in the first place? Do you really love me? Ethan didn't understand the question. As children, he treated Sarah like a sister, but his family constantly reminded him that they were meant to marry. Growing up in a powerful family, he'd learned early on that marriage was a matter of family arrangement. He quickly accepted their pronouncements. He'd seen plenty of loveless, public-facing marriages among the elite. As long as they appeared devoted in public, that was enough. To him, love wasn't the point. Sarah was his future wife, someone who could handle any problem, any annoyance or person he disliked. He naturally turned to her to resolve. As long as they ultimately married, that was all that mattered. Sarah, does it matter? Sarah took a deep breath and nodded firmly. Ethan frowned, seemingly perplexed. Sarah, as long as I marry you in the end, isn't that what matters? Why get hung up on irrelevant questions? Ethan's tone was as naive as ever. But to Sarah, it was a final judgment. As a child, her parents fought constantly over affairs. It was often just her and her mother in their huge house. Her only memory of her father was the sight of him storming out. That planted a seed in her young heart. Her marriage would be built on genuine, pure love. And Ethan clearly wasn't the person who could give her that. The thought brought a strange sense of relief. She removed her veil. Ethan, let's call off the engagement. Sarah Johnson floored it on the way to the hospital. If she hadn't glanced at the local news before heading back to her suburban studio apartment, she wouldn't have known John Sullivan had also been injured at the graduation party. Guilt gnawed at her. That night, she'd instinctively shielded Ethan Williams, completely oblivious to John lying injured on the ground. Consumed with wedding preparations, she'd sent him a quick text and nothing more. He must be so lonely in the hospital, all by himself. Slamming on the brakes at a florist, Sarah rushed in and ordered a bouquet of yellow roses. Yellow roses symbolized apology and a plea for forgiveness, not just for neglecting him at the party, but for 2 years of deception. She finally realized she couldn't betray John's devotion any longer. She had to confess and beg for his forgiveness. Arriving at the hospital, she had no idea which room he was in, so she went to the nurse's station. The nurse checked the records, then looked up puzzled. John Sullivan has already been discharged. What's your relationship to him? Sarah froze. Discharged? Why hadn't he texted her? I'm his girlfriend. When did he leave? The nurse's eyes swept over Sarah's impeccably tailored dress and the Patek Philippe watch on her wrist, one of only 10 in the world. Such wealth, yet so stingy she wouldn't even cover her boyfriend's medical bills. The nurse thought, her tone hardening. He was discharged yesterday. Shouldn't you know that, being his girlfriend? Sarah frowned, bewildered by the nurse's sudden hostility. Since he wasn't there was no point in staying. He was probably back at his studio apartment. She needed to get back. As she walked away, she overheard the nurses gossiping. Looks like she's loaded, but her boyfriend can't even afford his hospital bills. Pathetic. Maybe it's a knockoff. How can you be sure it's real? Real or not, she clearly doesn't care about him. Doesn't even know he's been discharged. And no one visited him while he was here. Poor guy all alone in that bed. Sarah stopped dead. No money for his hospital bills? She spun around, wanting to demand an explanation, but the nurses clammed up. She immediately called her family's executive assistant and told him to get to the hospital. The hospital administration rushed out to greet the Johnson family representative. Desperate to know what happened to John, Sarah demanded to speak with his doctor. The doctor arrived with 2 sets of John's medical records, one from yesterday's injury and another from a week earlier when he collapsed. Sarah picked up the first record, her frown deepening with each line. Over 100 superficial injuries across the body, a 2-centimeter deep, 5-centimeter long laceration on the left side of his face requiring immediate reconstructive surgery. The doctor nervously watched her expression. The surgery would have cost $10,000. Without it, he'll be scarred. Mr. Sullivan declined, seemingly because he couldn't afford it. Sarah's face hardened, her chest constricting with guilt. She knew exactly why John didn't have the money. He'd given her all his savings, $60,000, for her cancer treatment. Except the cancer had been a lie to manipulate him. And now, because of her, he'd be scarred for life. What'd she been doing while he lay in hospital? She'd blithely spent $80,000 on scar cream for a tiny scratch on Ethan Williams' face. And John couldn't even afford $10,000 for his surgery. Hesitantly, the doctor handed her the second set of records. Ms. Johnson, these are from Mr. Sullivan's hospitalization a week ago. The results show Mr. Sullivan is missing a kidney. Impossible, Sarah Johnson blurted out, instinctively rejecting the doctor's words. They'd been together for 2 years. How could she not know he was missing a kidney? The doctor, his face etched with concern, insisted on handing her the test results. Miss Johnson, please take a look. Sarah snatched the papers, her legs nearly giving way as she absorbed the information. John Sullivan was indeed missing a kidney. But when did this happen? How could she have been so oblivious? Panic swelled within her. She immediately called her assistant, demanding to know John's whereabouts and activities over the past few weeks. Hanging up, she sank into a chair, her grip on the test results so tight her knuckles turned white. The hushed atmosphere in the waiting room amplified her distress. Everyone seemed to hold their breath, fearful of disturbing her. Her assistant was efficient, returning with information within half an hour. For Sarah, every second of that wait felt like an eternity. Her hand trembled as she answered the call. What did you find? Ms. Johnson, her assistant reported. Mr. Sullivan sold a kidney on the black market a fortnight ago for $50,000. According to sources, it appears he needed the money for medical treatment. Sarah's world shattered. John had sold his kidney to pay for her supposed cancer treatment. Her lips pressed together, biting back a sob, as a wave of regret washed over her. Her cancer diagnosis had been a lie. Yet, to cure her, John had not only given her his entire savings of $6,000, but had also resorted to selling an organ to raise the remaining treatment costs. She had never regretted her deception more than at this moment. The 2-year-old lie she had concocted with Ethan Williams, now a crushing weight on her conscience. Where could John be now? Sarah suddenly remembered the wedding invitation she had given him a week ago. Rushing from the hospital, she sped towards the hotel, flooring the gas pedal. She had to find him, to confess, to beg his forgiveness. Regardless of his reaction, she would take him to the best specialists, find him a matching donor. This debt, heavy as a mountain, was one she could never truly repay. Sarah made the half-hour drive in 15 minutes. After arriving and abruptly canceling the wedding, her family and friends dispersed in a flurry of disapproval. Her parents threatened to disown her if she didn't reconsider. But none of that mattered anymore. All that mattered was finding the man whose heart she had so carelessly broken. As she entered the hotel, a staff member approached with a package. Miss Johnson, you have a same-day delivery. Recognizing the wedding invitation on top, Sarah accepted the box, her hands shaking, still clinging to a desperate shred of denial. But when she opened it, revealing a collection of cheap trinkets, her last hope crumbled. Inside were all the gifts she had ever given John, including his cherished watch, carelessly tossed among the rest. The sight of those items, many of which she could barely recall giving him, squeezed the air from her lungs. As the heiress to the Johnson fortune, she had never paid attention to the price of things, seeing them merely as numbers. To maintain her charade with John, she'd specifically asked his housekeeper where to find the cheapest goods. Learning about an app called Pinot, known for its low prices, she'd filled their relationship with gifts from there or random trinkets bought from street vendors. Each time, John had embraced her with joy, treasuring every single item. Now, discarded like trash, they symbolized the end of their love. The thought pierced her heart. She couldn't imagine a life without him. Picking up the fallen invitation, she noticed a handwritten message on the back, wishing you happiness. Goodbye forever. Sarah closed her eyes, the invitation slipping from her numb fingers. He had known all along. Fragments of their time together, previously insignificant, now flooded her memory. John's recent lack of contact, his discarding of their shared belongings. It had all been there, the quiet unraveling of their relationship, a testament to her cruel deception. 2 years ago, when this charade began, Sarah Johnson wore a mask every day in front of John Sullivan, carefully maintaining her disguise. Even though she couldn't stand the suburban studio apartment, smaller than her bathroom back home, she pretended to see it as a cozy haven. Even though she wasn't used to the discount clothes John Sullivan painstakingly picked out online, she feigned delight. Even though street food wasn't her style, she'd sit with him curbside, seemingly enjoying every bite. Gradually, she adapted. This life, though lacking money, was filled with a simple, genuine warmth. The 100-square-foot rental felt more like home than her cold, sprawling mansion. The clothes, though uncomfortable, held a genuine love. She realized now, after 2 years of this ordinary life, that she had truly fallen for John Sullivan, for the life they shared. But that love was built on deceit. Today, the illusion shattered. John Sullivan hadn't raged or accused. He simply offered a blessing, a farewell, severing the past 2 years. Sarah felt like a lost traveler in an endless desert. Water, an oasis, shimmered just ahead. She ran, desperately, but never reached it. When she stumbled and rose again, the oasis had vanished. A mirage. She collapsed, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek and disappearing into the dust. When she awoke, Ethan Williams sat nearby, playing on his phone. "Sarah," he said, seeing her stir. "My parents said if you apologize, we can pretend this never happened. Our families can still unite." Sarah turned her head away. "Leave, Ethan. I've canceled the engagement. I won't change my mind." Ethan, accustomed to a lifetime of deference, couldn't believe her continued rejection. "Why? Didn't you always want to marry me? Don't tell me you actually fell for that lowlife, John Sullivan." Sarah's face hardened. She wouldn't tolerate insults toward John. "Ethan Williams, I will not let you speak about John that way." Ethan stared, seeing the genuine emotion in her eyes, then laughed. "Sarah, remember what you called him 2 years ago? You called him a penniless loser. 2 years of living like a pauper, and you've actually grown fond of him? You look like death warmed over. You must know you tricked him. You think he'd stay with someone who deceived him for 2 years? Especially after you helped me play all those pranks on him? Don't kid yourself." Each word was a dagger to Sarah's heart. If she'd known she'd fall in love with John, she never would have agreed to help Ethan get his petty revenge. But there were no second chances. Sarah closed her eyes, her voice cold. "My affairs are none of your concern. Leave." Dismissed again, Ethan's own anger flared. For 20 years, he'd considered Sarah his future wife, his possession. 2 years ago, he'd only wanted John Sullivan to taste a fall from grace. He'd never imagined Sarah developing feelings, let alone choosing that life over him, over her family. "Sarah Johnson, think carefully. Once I walk out that door, I'm not coming back. Are you sure you want to choose that sheep man?" Ethan's continued belittling of John made Sarah's face darken with a terrifying coldness. "Get out." Ethan slammed the door. A notification chime sounded from her phone. It was her assistant with news of John's whereabouts. "Ms. Johnson, John Sullivan School has a graduate exchange program. He's on a list. He should have landed in England by now." Sarah's gaze grew determined. "Find the school's address and book me the next flight to England." John Sullivan had just emerged from surgery. The bandages on his face partially obscured his vision, and as he reached out to feel his way along the wall, a small hand reached out to him. "Here, Junior, take my hand. I'll guide you." It was Jessica Miller, a former exchange student from their university back home, and, like John, a student of William Brown. They had known each other from their time working together in Professor Brown's lab back in their home country. She had even picked him up from the airport on his first day in England, helped him register at the university, and shown him around campus. John smiled and placed his hand in her warm palm. "Looks like this wounded soldier is going to be a burden on his senior." Jessica's ears flushed pink, though she kept her expression neutral. "It's my duty as your senior to look after you. Besides, Professor Brown specifically asked me to keep an eye on you before you arrived. I don't want the old man chewing me out." John paused, then said sincerely, "Thank you, Jessica." When Jessica first saw John after the accident, she'd been startled, barely recognizing him. She'd been terrified something awful had happened. Learning it was just a fall onto broken glass brought a wave of relief. When he joked about her having to face a scarred lab partner every day, Jessica immediately sought out the best local surgeon to repair the damage. Even when John protested, she'd insisted. John, nobody wants a scar on their face. If surgery can prevent it, why not have it? John pressed his lips together, unable to admit he'd spent all his money on tuition and had nothing left for surgery. Jessica seemed to read his mind. She patted his shoulder. Don't worry. Professor Brown wrote to the university here, explained your situation, and secured you a grant and a work-study position. You can also pick up extra hours in the lab when it's free. Warmth flooded through John. He hadn't expected Professor Brown to go to such lengths for him. This time, John didn't refuse. Knowing that the sooner the surgery was done, the better the results would be, John went to the hospital early the next morning. Jessica volunteered to accompany him. Being new to the country and unfamiliar with his surroundings, John was grateful for her thoughtfulness. After a day of 4 fluids at the hospital, they returned to the university. Jessica walked him to his dorm room and carefully explained the dosage for each medication in the bag. This one is once a day, just 1 pill. It's for inflammation. This is a topical spray. Apply it to the wound after you change the dressing. Such attentive care brought a much-needed sense of warmth to John, still adjusting to his new life in England. Every day after that, Jessica texted reminders to take his medication and change his bandages. The scars on his face gradually faded. When classes officially began, John and Jessica found themselves in the same lab again. To facilitate discussions about their research, they began eating all 3 meals together and leaving the lab together in the evenings. This particular morning, they had pulled an all-nighter in the lab, chasing a single data point. As dawn broke, they finally got the result. John stretched, his body stiff and aching from sitting all night. Jessica leaned in conspiratorially. Junior, how about I take you for some noodles? I know a place near campus run by a Chinese family. The food is authentic. John's eyes lit up. He readily agreed. It had been weeks since he'd arrived in England, and between settling in and the demands of the lab, he'd been grabbing quick, bland meals at the cafeteria. His stomach had been staging a revolt. After breakfast, they both felt content. John rubbed his full belly, the exhaustion of the all-nighter melting away. They walked back to campus, chatting and laughing. As usual, Jessica walked him to his dorm. They agreed to take the day off and get back to work in the lab the following day. As John was about to say goodbye, he heard a familiar voice call out from behind him. John! As soon as Sarah Johnson found out John Sullivan's school address, she immediately had her assistant book the earliest flight abroad. But before she could even board the plane, she was stopped by members of the Johnson family. Her father, his face dark with anger, slapped her hard across the face. Rebellious daughter, how long are you going to keep this up? He's just some orphan from Hope Orphanage with nothing to his name. You'd actually call off your engagement with the Williams family for him? I didn't object when you spent the last 2 years pretending to be poor and dating that man, just to spite the Williams boy, but that doesn't mean I'll allow you to marry him. My son-in-law, even if he isn't from the Williams family, must come from a family of equal standing. The force of the slap snapped Sarah Johnson's head to the side, a trickle of blood escaping the corner of her mouth, but she still looked defiantly at her father. I won't marry Ethan Williams, and I won't marry anyone else. I only love John. Her father's chest heaved with fury. He raised his cane and struck her hard across the back. Lock this defiant girl in the ancestral hall. Though Sarah Johnson struggled fiercely, she was no match for the bodyguards restraining her. They confiscated all her electronic devices and locked her in the hall. No one saw her except for the person who brought her meals each day. But after half a month, she still hadn't yielded and even began a hunger strike. After 3 days without food or water, her mother couldn't stand it any longer. She pleaded with Sarah's father to let her out. Her father had no choice but to release her, though his expression remained incredibly grim. I'll allow you to go to England to find that man, but you must promise me, if he doesn't come back with you, you will return home obediently and marry a man of suitable standing. Her father slammed his cane on the floor, the sound echoing loudly. Sarah Johnson agreed immediately. In her heart, she knew John Sullivan had loved her for 2 years. Loved her enough to be willing to sell his own kidney to save her life. She believed that if she sincerely apologized and told him she had truly fallen in love with him, he would forgive her. As soon as she was out of the ancestral hall, Sarah Johnson flew abroad. She had considered that when she first saw John Sullivan, he might ignore her or call her a liar and tell her to get lost. But none of that mattered. Just seeing him would be enough. Once he forgave her, she would formally propose to him, declaring her love to everyone. But she never expected that when she finally saw him a month later, there would already be another woman by his side. The two were chatting and laughing the whole way, not even noticing her following behind them. She felt like a thief, secretly watching someone else's happiness from behind. But seeing his familiar back, longing washed over her like a tidal wave. Just as she felt she couldn't bear it a second longer, she finally called out the name she longed for. John, I finally found you. What are you doing here? Aren't you engaged to Ethan Williams? John Sullivan instinctively took a step back, putting distance between them. The movement sent a pang of pain through Sarah Johnson's heart, but she knew she was the one who had hurt him. I called off the wedding with Ethan Williams. The person I love is you. She reached out, almost uncontrollably, wanting to take his hand like she used to. Jessica Miller, who had been standing silently nearby, immediately stepped in front of John Sullivan, shielding him. Ma'am, let's just talk. No need to get physical. Sarah Johnson had disliked the woman standing next to John Sullivan from the start, but she had held back, afraid of making a bad impression during their first reunion. Her face instantly turned cold. This is between me and my boyfriend. It's none of your business. John Sullivan immediately countered. Sarah Johnson, we broke up over half a month ago. Jessica Miller shielded him even more protectively. Being clingy isn't very becoming. John Sullivan pointed to the fading scar on his face. When I first came to England, I was covered in injuries. The worst was this gash on my face, deep enough to see bone. If you hadn't chosen to save your childhood sweetheart, if I hadn't given you all my money for that non-existent cancer, this scar would have healed long ago. At the mention of the wound, all the anger in Sarah Johnson's heart deflated like a puncture balloon. Asterisk yes. Asterisk if she hadn't started this deception 2 years ago, if she hadn't tricked him out of all his savings, if she had chosen to protect him in that moment of crisis, things wouldn't have ended up like this. Seeing Sarah Johnson's crestfallen expression, John Sullivan pressed his lips together. He knew Sarah Johnson's personality. If he didn't make things absolutely clear, she wouldn't leave. John Sullivan signaled for Jessica Miller to leave first, indicating he had something to say to Sarah Johnson alone. After all, they were right outside the dormitory. Sarah Johnson wouldn't do anything too drastic. Only after confirming repeatedly that he wouldn't be in danger alone did Jessica Miller walk away, glancing back every few steps. Sarah Johnson, however, mistook this for a sign that John Sullivan was softening, and a flicker of hope rose within her. But in the next second, that hope was ruthlessly shattered. Sarah Johnson, I don't love you anymore. Please leave. How could this be? We were only apart for 2 weeks. Weren't those 2 years blissful? Sarah Johnson pleaded, desperately listing the memories they had made together. But for John Sullivan, those memories were proof of 2 years spent as a fool. Our relationship was founded on deception. Sarah froze, unable to refute his words. Her eyes pleaded with him. John, I know I was wrong. It was my fault. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have lied to you. But our experiences over the past 2 years were real, she added. The words, I'm sorry, felt hollow to John. His genuine affection had been trampled on, his sincere emotions used as playthings. From the moment he learned the truth, their relationship was over. He could never tolerate deceit. Sarah Johnson, do those 3 words erase the pain I've endured for 2 years? Can they mend my shattered heart? Can they give me back my kidney? With every question, Sarah's face paled further. She stood paralyzed, unable to speak. John gave her a final look. Go back. Don't bother me again. I don't want to see you. He continued. You live your life as a socialite. I'll pursue my studies. We're from different worlds. Meeting each other was a mistake. John turned and walked upstairs. Sarah stood frozen, watching his figure disappear, ultimately remaining silent. She had initiated their relationship with a lie and repeatedly hurt him throughout. How could she have the audacity to beg for his forgiveness? The next day, at the agreed-upon time for their experiment, John came downstairs. He saw Sarah still standing there, but ignored her, walking directly toward Jessica Miller. He casually took the sandwich she offered, looking at her curiously. Jessica Miller, aren't you going to ask about last night? Jessica chuckled and ruffled his hair. That's your private business. You'll tell me if you want to, she added. Besides, I could guess from the first time I met you. I heard back home that you had a close girlfriend, yet you arrived overseas heartbroken. I figure it was because of the person from last night. I don't want to relive those unpleasant experiences and cause you more pain by talking about them. John felt a pang of sadness and lowered his head to eat his sandwich. Come on, cheer up and let's get to the experiment. Research is the one constant. John nodded firmly. Right, I had a new idea for yesterday's experiment. We could. Sarah stood there, watching John's receding figure until he disappeared. She had made too many mistakes and had no right to continue bothering him. Being able to see him one last time, seeing him happy and fulfilled, was enough for her. That afternoon, she booked a flight back home. Upon her return, she was a changed person, taking over Johnson Family Enterprise as her father had requested, but never pursuing a strategic marriage. With the company's power in her hands, her father was frustrated but powerless. 2 years later, a university announced the return of a group of students from studying abroad and the launch of a new research project. Its success would be a major step forward for the country's scientific research. Sarah watched the familiar figure on the news, her hand pausing mid-signature on a document. She called her assistant and instructed her to make an anonymous donation of $100 million to a university's new project. This was perhaps one of the few things she could do for John. The kidney and the $60,000 from 2 years ago, she could spend a lifetime trying to repay him and still fall short. The end.